The morning air was crisp enough to bite, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones before you realize it. Mist rolled lazily over the river's surface, blurring the far bank into a watercolor haze. Eli Dawson sat on a fallen log near the water's edge, flicking flat stones into the current and watching the ripples fade into nothing. 17 years old, and already carrying the weariness of a man twice his age, Eli had learned not to expect much from life. He had been on his own since the wagon accident that claimed his parents 3 winters ago. No brothers, no sisters, no aunts or uncles who came searching. The world just kept going without him, and so he kept moving with it. He drifted from one dusty frontier town to another, taking whatever work came his way, hauling sacks of grain for a penny, shoveling manure from behind the stables, sometimes even sleeping in those same stables when the nights turned cold. It wasn't a good life, but it was a life. That morning, hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he ignored it. He'd eaten little more than a biscuit the day before, and he didn't have a coin left to his name. The river had a calming effect on him, even when it was swollen and fast like it was now, fed by snowmelt from the mountains. The sound of rushing water reminded him of his father's voice, deep, steady, and somehow safe. A sudden movement on the opposite bank caught his eye. At first it was just a dark shape, half hidden by the mist. Then it shifted, wobbling slightly before steadying itself on a crooked stick. Eli narrowed his eyes. It was a man old, bent with age, wearing clothing that marked him as native. A band of beads crossed his chest, and his long hair was streaked with white. Braided neatly despite the damp air, the man stood on the muddy slope leading down to the river, leaning heavily on his walking stick. Eli could see his left leg dragging slightly when he tried to step. He wasn't just old, he was hurt or crippled. The river in front of him surged with icy strength, the kind that could knock a strong man off his feet in seconds. Eli frowned. The nearest bridge was at least 2 miles downstream. Anyone trying to cross here was either desperate or foolish. The elder's eyes lifted, scanning the far side of the river. When they found Eli, the man paused, as if deciding whether to call out. Then, raising one weathered hand, he made a slow, beckoning gesture. Eli hesitated. Experience had taught him to be wary of strangers, especially when they wanted something. People didn't usually call for help without expecting to take more than they gave. But something in the man's expression caught him off guard. It wasn't fear. It wasn't command. It was need. Simple, honest need. He rose from the log and stepped closer to the river's edge. "You trying to cross?" he called out. The elder tilted his head, not quite catching the words, but his gesture was answer enough. He nodded, pointing across the river and then tapping his own chest. Eli glanced at the water again. Fast, freezing, dangerous. Every sensible part of him wanted to wave the man toward the bridge and walk away. But he didn't. Maybe it was because he saw something familiar in that face, a kind of loneliness that ran deeper than the cold. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Wait there!" The elder seemed to understand, because he stayed still as Eli started downstream, searching for a place where the current wasn't quite as vicious. The bank was slick under his boots, and twice he had to grab at the reeds to keep from sliding in too soon. Eventually, he found a spot where the river narrowed, the water dark and churning between 2 clusters of rock. When he reached the other side, he was breathing hard, his boots soaked from the shallows. The elder was waiting for him, leaning on his stick but standing proud despite the strain in his leg. Up close, Eli could see the fine lines carved deep into the man's face, the kind that told stories without words. The old man spoke softly in his own language, fluid, melodic syllables that Eli didn't understand. But when the elder tapped his chest, then pointed across the river, the meaning was clear enough. Eli nodded slowly. "All right. We'll cross together." And for the first time that morning, the cold didn't feel quite so sharp. The river roared beside them, its whitecaps foaming over jagged rocks, the spray clinging to Eli's face like cold sweat. The elder's dark eyes never left the water, as though he knew exactly what it could do to a man who misjudged its strength. Up close, Eli noticed more details, how the elder's right hand gripped the carved walking stick like it was an extension of his own body, how the left leg dragged behind with every step, the knee refusing to bend fully. His clothing, though worn, carried care in its making. A long shirt stitched with intricate bead patterns, fringes swaying in the breeze, a necklace of carved bone resting against his chest. The man spoke again, his words wrapped in a language Eli didn't know, each syllable deliberate and low. Eli shook his head, lifting his hands in a helpless shrug. "I don't understand you," he said, his voice carrying over the river's rush. The elder seemed to think for a moment, then raised his walking stick and pointed it toward the far bank. His gaze drifted upward, following the trail of smoke that curled faintly from somewhere beyond the trees. Then, tapping his own chest, he let out a short breath, almost like a sigh. "You need to get home," Eli guessed aloud. The old man didn't answer in words, but his eyes said enough. Eli's gaze swept over the water again. There was no easy crossing here. The current was fast, swollen by mountain runoff, the color deep with silt. If they slipped, the river would take them under in seconds. He chewed his lip, torn between caution and instinct. Helping strangers hadn't always ended well for him in the past. More than once, kindness had earned him nothing but trouble lost. Coins, stolen boots, a night in the sheriff's jail when someone else's crime was pinned on him. But this wasn't the same. The elder wasn't bargaining, wasn't offering coin or promises. He was simply standing there, waiting, because he didn't have another choice. Eli stepped closer and extended his arm. "Here," he said simply. The man hesitated, his gaze flicking to Eli's face, searching for something sincerity, maybe, or strength. Whatever it was, he must have found it. He placed his weathered hand into Eli's, his grip surprisingly firm. They approached the edge together. The river's voice grew louder, a deep, relentless growl. Eli glanced at the rocks ahead, trying to pick out the shallowest path. The elder's stick sank into the mud with each step, but he didn't falter. "All right," Eli muttered, more to himself than anyone. "We'll go slow, just hang on." The first step into the water was like plunging into melted ice. Eli gasped sharply, his breath snatched away by the cold. The elder, though silent, flinched as the water rushed over his boots, soaking the fringes of his clothing by the time it reached their knees. The current was pushing hard, tugging at their legs like unseen hands trying to drag them under. Eli tightened his grip on the elder's arm and took another careful step. The riverbed was treacherous, slick stones shifting beneath their weight. The elder leaned heavily against Eli, his injured leg making it impossible to move quickly. Each step became a battle. Plant your foot, find balance, brace for the pull of the water, then move again. Halfway across, Eli's boot slid off a hidden rock. He staggered, feeling the river rise to his thighs, the current shoving against his side. The elder's weight nearly pulled them both down, but Eli dug in, muscles straining until he found his footing again. "You all right?" Eli asked breathlessly. The elder didn't answer in words, but he gave a single, short nod. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the far bank. Step by step, they pushed forward. Eli's legs ached, and his hands were numb from the cold. At one point, a sudden swell of water surged past, forcing them to stop entirely. The elder's walking stick wedged between two rocks, giving them a precious moment of stability. Finally, the water began to shallow. The current still pulled at their boots. but Eli could see mud instead of swirling depths beneath his feet. The elder's grip loosened slightly, his breathing heavy but steady. When they reached the far bank, Eli scrambled up first, then turned to help the old man. With a firm pull, he brought him onto solid ground. For a moment, neither spoke. They just stood there, breathing hard, the roar of the river fading behind them. The elder turned to Eli, his eyes softening. Slowly, he raised a hand and placed it over his heart, then extended it toward Eli. It wasn't a handshake, it was something older, something with weight behind it. Eli, unsure but moved, mimicked the gesture. The old man gave a small smile, then motioned with his stick for Eli to follow. Without another word, he began making his way toward the shadowed forest beyond. And though Eli didn't yet understand why, his feet began to follow. The forest swallowed the river's roar as they moved deeper into the shadows, but Eli could still feel its icy pull in his legs. His boots squelched with each step, leaving dark prints in the damp earth. The elder walked slowly, leaning heavily on his carved stick, every motion deliberate, as though he had long ago learned to measure his strength. Eli stayed close, partly to steady him if needed, partly because he wasn't sure where they were headed. The forest here was thicker than the patches near town. Tall pines and cottonwoods arched overhead, their branches weaving into a green canopy that muted the light. Shafts of pale sun broke through in places, dappling the ground in moving patterns. They walked in silence for a long while. The only sounds were the elder's stick tapping against roots and stones, the faint rustle of squirrels above, and Eli's own breathing. After a time, the trees thinned, revealing another stretch of river wider here, calmer on the surface, but with a dark, deceptive current just beneath. The far bank was lush with undergrowth, and beyond it rose a steep, wooded hill. The elder stopped, planted his stick in the ground, and gazed across the water. His face was unreadable, but his eyes sharp despite the wrinkle scanned the river the way a hunter studies his prey. Eli stepped up beside him. "You're telling me we've got to cross again?" The elder didn't answer in words. Instead, he stepped forward, tapping the ground near the edge of the bank. He pointed across to a cluster of large stones breaking the surface midstream, spaced just far enough apart that a determined man could leap from one to the next. Eli stared at them, then back at the old man. "You're serious?" The elder nodded once. The boy let out a long breath through his nose. The stones would help, sure, but one wrong step and they'd be swept away. Still, he wasn't about to back down now. "All right," Eli said, adjusting his grip on the elder's arm. "We'll do it like before, one step at a time." They approached the first stone. It was slick, a green film of algae coating its surface, but it was flat enough to stand on. Eli stepped up first, then turned and helped the elder follow. The man's stick clicked against the stone, steadying him. From there, it became a slow, careful dance. Step to the next stone, plant your foot. Hold steady. Extend your hand. Pull the elder across. Repeat. The river murmured around them, its low voice promising a cold embrace if they faltered. The stones were spaced unevenly, forcing Eli to stretch with each leap. Twice, his boots slipped and icy water surged over the tops, soaking his socks. The elder, for his part, moved with the patience of someone who had done this before, though his injured leg made each step a battle. Halfway across, the wind picked up, sending ripples across the surface and rocking the reflection of the trees in broken patterns. Eli paused on a larger stone, catching his breath. His thighs burned from the strain, but he didn't complain. He just waited until the elder caught up, then they moved on. One leap from the far bank, disaster nearly struck. Eli had just pulled the elder onto a small, rounded stone when the man's walking stick slipped between two cracks and lodged there. As he tried to free it, His foot slid, and the sudden shift in weight sent him pitching toward the water. Eli reacted without thinking. He lunged, wrapping an arm around the elder's chest and pulling him back upright. The stick clattered loose and bobbed in the current for a moment, before the elder caught it again. They stood there for a few seconds, breathing hard, the river hissing around them. The old man gave Eli a look not of fear, but of acknowledgement. The kind a man gives when he knows his life just balanced on the edge. "Let's finish this," Eli said quietly. The last leap carried them onto the far bank, both of them stumbling into the grass. Eli dropped onto one knee, chest heaving, while the elder stood silently for a moment, looking back across the water. Then he turned, his expression soft, and placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. There was no spoken thanks, no drawn-out gesture, just that hand, warm and steady, saying more than words could. Then, with a small tilt of his head, the elder motioned toward the forest trail that wound uphill from the river. Eli rose, still catching his breath, and followed. He didn't know where they were going, but for some reason, he trusted that wherever this path ended, it would matter. The uphill trail was narrow, winding through dense undergrowth that brushed against Eli's legs as he walked. The ground was soft with pine needles, muffling their footsteps. Every so often, the elder would glance back to make sure Eli was still with him, his pace steady but unhurried. Eli's curiosity grew with every step. Where was this man taking him? He didn't seem dangerous. If anything, he radiated the kind of calm that made Eli feel strangely safe. Still, Eli had been on his own long enough to know that unfamiliar paths could lead to trouble. The forest opened slowly, as though it had been guarding its secret until now. The first sign of life was the smoke-thin, curling strands rising lazily between the trees. Then came the sounds, the high-pitched laughter of children, the low hum of women's voices, the rhythmic thunk of someone splitting wood. When they stepped out of the trees, Eli stopped in his tracks. Before him lay a small valley cradled by forest and hill. Round lodges, covered in hides and supported by wooden poles, dotted the clearing. Lines of drying herbs and bundles of meat hung near the fires. Dogs trotted between groups of people, their tails wagging. The elder's presence drew immediate attention. People looked up from their work, their conversations pausing as their eyes shifted to Eli. He could feel their gazes, some cautious, some curious, a few outright suspicious. A young boy holding a carved stick froze mid-game, staring at Eli as though trying to figure out what kind of creature had wandered into their world. Eli shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the elder as if for reassurance. The old man said something, in his own language, his voice carrying authority. Whatever he said seemed to ease the tension slightly. A few people nodded, others went back to what they were doing, though the glances kept coming. A young woman approached, her hair braided and tied with colorful strips of cloth. She carried a woven blanket over her arm and draped it across Eli's shoulders without a word. The warmth of the thick fabric sank into his damp clothes, chasing away some of the chill from the river. Thanks, Eli muttered, though he wasn't sure if she understood. She gave a small smile before stepping back. A boy no older than 12 appeared next, holding out a wooden bowl filled with steaming stew. The smell made Eli's stomach twist with sudden hunger-rich broth, tender meat, and the faint tang of wild herbs. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if it was truly meant for him, but the boy pressed it into his hands with a grin before darting away. The elder motioned for Eli to follow him toward the largest fire in the center of the village. They sat together on low wooden stools. Around them, life moved at its own pace, women tending the fires, men mending tools, children chasing each other between the lodges. Eli ate slowly at first, the heat of the stew almost too much after the cold river. Elder spoke occasionally to those who passed by, always gesturing briefly toward Eli as if explaining his presence. Though Eli couldn't understand the words, he could sense something in the tone. Pride, maybe, or gratitude. Once the bowl was empty, Eli set it aside and leaned back slightly, still wrapped in the blanket. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about where he'd sleep that night or how he'd find his next meal. Here, in this hidden valley, surrounded by strangers, he felt strangely at ease. The elder tapped his arm and pointed toward one of the lodges. Inside, Eli could see bundles of dried plants, baskets, and carved wooden masks hanging on the walls. The man spoke softly, his voice low and deliberate, but Eli caught only a few words. Rest? Safe? Here? Eli nodded. All right. I'll stay for a bit. The elder gave a faint smile, his eyes glinting with something Eli couldn't yet read. Then he stood, his walking stick tapping against the packed earth as he moved toward the fire again, leaving Eli to watch the rhythm of the village. It was a rhythm he didn't yet understand, but something told him it wouldn't take long before it felt familiar. The night in the lodge was warmer than Eli expected. The blanket the young woman had given him was thick, the fire outside casting a steady glow through the hide walls. He drifted in and out of sleep, lulled by the soft murmurs of voices and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. By morning, the valley was alive with the sounds of a new day. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat hung in the crisp air. Eli stepped outside, blinking at the sunlight, and found the village moving with quiet purpose, women grinding corn, men carrying firewood, children herding a pair of goats toward a small pen. He spotted the elder seated by the central fire, his walking stick across his knees. A young man was speaking to him in quick, fluid bursts of their language. The elder listened, nodding occasionally, his gaze drifting toward Eli when he thought the boy wasn't looking. When Eli began to approach, the young man finished his words and stepped aside. The elder motioned for Eli to sit beside him. You help, the elder said slowly, the words careful, as though he were selecting them from a shelf in his mind. You cross river, you save me. He touched his chest lightly with his palm, then gestured to the surrounding village. You save all. Eli frowned slightly. All? The elder nodded once, his eyes sharp. I am elder. I guide. Without me, my people worry. He tapped the ground with his stick. You bring me home. Before Eli could think of how to respond, a woman stepped forward holding a small leather pouch. She offered it to the elder, who accepted it with both hands before turning to Eli. For you, he said simply. Eli hesitated. I can't take anything. The elder's eyes softened but held steady. You will take. He pressed the pouch into Eli's hands. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. Eli loosened the drawstring and peeked inside. A carved bone pendant lay on top, smoothed by years of handling. Beneath it was a small bundle of coins, enough, Eli guessed, to keep him fed for weeks, maybe months if he stretched it. It is trust, the elder explained, tapping the pendant. It means you are welcome. You come, you go, always welcome. Eli's throat tightened unexpectedly. He'd been given things before: coins for work, scraps of food, a bed for the night, but never something that meant he belonged anywhere. He closed the pouch and held it tightly. Thank you, he said quietly. The elder gave a short nod, then rose with effort, leaning on his stick. He turned to the gathered villagers, speaking in their language. Eli couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the warmth in them. People nodded, a few smiling openly at him now, others murmuring to each other. A small girl, her hair in 2 braids, approached shyly and offered him a piece of dried fruit. When Eli crouched to take it, she grinned and darted away. For the rest of the day, the villagers treated him not as an intruder, but as someone who had earned a place among them. A man showed him how to repair the straps on his worn boots. 2. Boys invited him to join a game that involved tossing small bones into a circle drawn in the dirt. Even the dogs seemed to have decided he was part of the place, following him as he walked around the clearing. Eli kept the pouch close to his chest, the pendant's weight a strange comfort. He wasn't sure yet if he'd stay, but the thought of leaving already felt heavier than it should. As the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long, the elder joined him near the edge of the village. The two of them stood in silence, looking toward the trail that led back to the river. "You helped me," the elder said again, this time softer. "Now, we help you." Eli turned the words over in his mind. He'd never been part of any "we" before, not since his parents died. For the first time in years, the thought didn't scare him. The next morning, the sun rose golden over the valley, bathing the river in a shimmer that looked almost like molten copper. Ethan awoke to the distant sound of drums, not war drums, but slow, steady beats that carried a feeling of importance. He stepped outside the elder's lodge and saw people moving purposefully toward the central clearing. A young native boy, no more than 10, ran past, pausing to glance at Ethan. "The council meets today," he said in a hushed tone. "They're going to talk about you." Then he darted away, leaving Ethan standing in the cool morning air, his heart pounding. The idea of a council discussing his fate made Ethan uneasy. He had never been judged by a group before, not formally, at least. In the towns he had wandered through, people judged him in whispers, sideways glances, and muttered insults, but this felt different. Here, their judgment might decide whether he could stay or whether he'd be sent back into the wild world alone. The elder emerged from the lodge a moment later, leaning heavily on his carved walking stick. "You are nervous," he said, studying Ethan with those sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through skin and bone into the soul. "A little," Ethan admitted. The elder's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Good. A man who fears a council fears the weight of his own actions. That means you care about their verdict." Together, they walked toward the clearing. The whole tribe seemed to be gathered, men, women, and children forming a circle around a great fire. The council sat on the far side, 5 figures dressed in ceremonial clothing, each with symbols woven into their robes that spoke of their role: wisdom, history, protection, spirit, and balance. The drumming stopped as Ethan and the elder entered the circle. The crowd parted, allowing them to walk straight to the council center. The elder took his seat among them, while Ethan stood before the fire, feeling its heat on his face. A tall man with a hawk feather in his hair spoke first. "Ethan, son of no tribe, you came to us by the river. You helped our elder cross when others might have walked away. Why did you do this?" Ethan swallowed, his voice coming low but steady. "Because he needed help. I didn't think about what I'd get out of it. I just couldn't leave him there." The council exchanged glances. A woman with long silver braids leaned forward. "You ask for nothing, yet you have received food, shelter, and safety here. Do you believe you deserve these things from us?" "No," Ethan admitted, "but I'm grateful for them. I've lived most of my life taking care of myself. No one owes me anything, but if I can help your people in return, I will." His honesty seemed to ripple through the crowd. Few nodded quietly. Others studied him with more interest than suspicion now. The elder finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying over the gathering. "This boy's spirit is tested. He did not help me for reward, and when given kindness, he does not claim it as a right. This is rare." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But his place here must be decided by the tribe." The hawk-feathered man rose. "Then let us speak of the future. There is work here for a young man with strong arms and a willing heart. But there is also risk. Our tribe faces challenges from outside, the traders, the settlers, the changing land. If he stays, he must share our burdens." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "I will." The council murmured among themselves for several minutes, voices low, faces unreadable. The crowd waited in tense silence until finally, the woman with silver braids lifted her hand for quiet. "By the council's decision," she said, "Ethan may remain with the tribe if he proves his loyalty in the days ahead. There will be tasks set before him, and through them we will see if his heart walks the same path as ours." Relief washed through Ethan, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. He wasn't being accepted without condition. He would have to earn his place every single day. The drums began again, slower now, each beat echoing in Ethan's chest. The crowd dispersed, but many stayed behind to give him measured nods, small smiles, or a simple pat on the shoulder. They no longer looked at him as a stranger. Not yet as one of their own, perhaps, but no longer as an outsider who might vanish with the next sunrise dot. As the elder rose from his seat and came to stand beside him, he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "This is your first step," he said. "The river brought you to us. Now you must decide if you will cross into a life worth keeping." Ethan met his gaze and nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." The elder's eyes crinkled. "We shall see." The drums faded into the hum of daily life, but in Ethan's chest the rhythm stayed steady, determined, like the beating of a heart that had finally found a reason to keep going. Asterisk. The next morning, the village square was alive with quiet anticipation. The sun had barely risen, but already people were gathering near the great fire pit at the center of the settlement. Smoke curled upward into the crisp air, carrying with it the earthy scent of burning cedar. Eli stood near the edge of the crowd, his hands shoved deep into his worn jacket pockets, unsure if he belonged here at all. Beside him, Nakoma, the elder he had helped across the river, leaned on his carved walking staff. Though his steps were slow, his gaze was sharp, sweeping over the faces in the crowd. When his eyes fell on Eli, they softened for the briefest moment. "You must stand tall today," Nakoma murmured, his voice low but steady. "Whether you feel worthy or not, the truth of your heart will speak louder than any words." Eli nodded. Swallowing hard, his stomach churned. It had been only days since he helped Nakoma cross that icy river, but so much had changed. The tribe had welcomed him in offering food, a warm place to sleep, and quiet kindnesses that felt foreign too. Someone who had spent most of his young life alone. The murmuring of the crowd quieted when the tribal leader, Chief Weah, stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a robe adorned with patterns of deer and eagle feathers, he carried himself with a calm authority that silenced even the most restless children. "Brothers and sisters," Chief Weah began, his voice deep and deliberate, "we have gathered not for ceremony, but for decision. A stranger entered our land not with demands, but with an act of selflessness. He aided one of our own when the river sought to take him." Eli felt dozens of eyes shift toward him. Some were warm, others wary. He resisted the urge to step back. Chief Weah continued, "It is our way to see not just what a man does, but why he does it. Was it for reward? For glory? Or because the heart gave him no other choice?" Nakoma stepped forward then, leaning heavily on his staff. The old man's voice was weathered but strong. "This boy," he paused, glancing at Eli, "this young man did not know me. He owed me nothing. Yet he risked his own safety to help me when my strength failed. And afterward, he asked for nothing." There was a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. Eli kept his head down, heat rising in his cheeks. Nakoma's eyes swept the gathering. "We are taught to honor those who carry the spirit of generosity, not the generosity of coin, but of heart. It is that spirit that binds people together, even when blood does not. Chief Wea nodded and gestured to the semicircle of elders seated behind him. They began a low, deliberate discussion in their native tongue, their voices blending with the crackle of the fire. Eli caught only fragments, his own name, Nakoma's, and words he did not recognize. The wait felt endless. His mind raced. What if they told him to leave? What if this was their polite way of sending him back to the world that had already turned its back on him? Finally, the elders fell silent. Chief Wea stepped forward once more. "Eli," he said, the name carrying clearly through the still air, "you are not of our blood, nor of our land. But you have shown the spirit we value above all others. You have earned the right to remain among us not as a guest, but as family." Eli's breath caught. Family. A word that had been nothing more than an echo in his mind for years. The crowd began to speak all at once, some with smiles, others with cautious nods. A few still looked uncertain, but no one objected. Nakoma placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "You see, boy? A river may divide land, but it cannot divide hearts willing to reach across." For the first time in years, Eli felt something loosen in his chest. The weight of loneliness that had been his constant companion began to lift, replaced by something warmer. The chief raised his hand for quiet once more. "Tonight we feast not for victory, but for unity. Let it be known that from this day Eli walks our path as one of our own." The decision was final. The people dispersed slowly, some approaching Eli to clasp his hand, others offering food or small trinkets. The air felt lighter, the day brighter. Eli stood there, still trying to grasp it. He had come here by chance, guided by nothing more than instinct to help a man in need. And now, somehow, he had a place in the world again. And deep down, he knew the tribe's gesture had not just changed his life. It had given him one worth living. The morning after the great feast, the sun rose over the valley, painting the sky in streaks of gold and soft pink. Jack woke in the small tent they had given him, the sound of bird song and the scent of wood smoke filling the air. His body felt lighter than it had in years, not because his burdens were gone, but because, for the first time, he felt they were shared. He stepped outside to find Elder Tahu sitting on a carved wooden stool, wrapped in a fur-lined blanket. The old man's eyes crinkled into a smile when he saw Jack. "Come," Tahu said, beckoning him. "It is time you knew the rest." They walked together through the village, past the river where it had all begun. Children ran by, laughing, waving at Jack as if he had been part of their lives forever. Tahu led him to the great lodge at the center, its entrance marked by tall poles adorned with painted symbols. Inside, the air was warm, lit by the glow of a central fire. Around the flames sat the elders of the tribe. Chief Naira, a tall woman with silver hair braided down her back, rose to speak. "Jack," she began, her voice calm yet strong, "you did more than help an old man cross the river. You gave him dignity when others would have looked away. You showed courage without asking for reward. Our people do not forget such acts." She gestured to a young man standing near the wall. He carried a bundle wrapped in doeskin. When he placed it in Jack's hands, Jack hesitated, feeling the weight not just of the gift, but of its meaning. Slowly, he unwrapped it to reveal a beautifully crafted bow and a quiver of arrows. The bow was carved with intricate designs. Flowing rivers, soaring eagles, and in the center, a lone figure standing beside an elder. "This," Naira said, "is the bow of a guardian. It is not given lightly. With it, you are welcome as a friend and protector of our people." Jack's throat tightened. No one had ever given him something so valuable, not in gold or silver, but in trust. I don't know what to say." He stammered. "Say nothing," Tahu said with a soft chuckle. "Only live as you have lived with heart. But the ceremony wasn't over. Chief Nyara motioned for him to follow her outside. The whole tribe gathered in the clearing. Then Jack saw a small cabin at the edge of the village, freshly built, smoke already curling from its chimney. "This is your home now, Nyara," said. "You may stay as long as you wish. You will never be without food, without shelter, or without family here." Jack stood frozen. For years he had drifted from place to place, sleeping in barns, under trees, or wherever the night found him. And now he had a place to belong. His eyes burned with tears, but he didn't wipe them away. The children rushed forward, tugging at his arms, begging him to come see inside. The cabin was simple but warm, furnished with a bed, table, and shelves stocked with blankets and dried food. On the wall hung a small carved plaque of the river crossing someone had captured the very moment he had reached out to help Tahu. That night, as the moon rose high above the pines, Jack sat on the porch of his new home. The stars were so bright it felt like he could reach up and touch them. Tahu joined him, carrying 2 mugs of steaming herbal tea. They sat in silence for a while, the crackle of the fire from the village center drifting on the breeze. "No," Tahu said at last. "Life has a way of giving back what you think you've lost. Family is not always blood. Sometimes it's the people who find you along the way." Jack nodded. "I think I finally understand that." The old man smiled. "Then you are already one of us." Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled a low, haunting song that seemed less like a warning and more like a welcome. Jack leaned back, letting the sound wash over him. The boy who had once been alone now had a home, a family, and a place in the world. And it had all begun with one simple act of kindness by a cold riverbank dot. It would not be the last.